So that should be recording. And now I will share my screen. If my voice goes a bit slurry, it isn't because I've been drinking water, but do tell me and I will take my camera off. But I think we've got enough web bandwidth here to be able to do that without me switching my camera off. So it's uploading, which is a good sign, but I have had difficulties with the connection this morning. There we go. So am I still lucid? Yeah. So welcome to the third workshop on the RIBA stages. And today I'm going to talk about technical design and developed design. Concept design and developed design, stages 2 and 3. And this is where, in terms of the 5 E's, it moves from explore with DTA into the next E, which is expand, is it?
Enable.
Enable, that's it. I was just testing you, Alan.
Multiple choice questions, like the Prime Minister.
Yeah, multiple choice answers anyway. So stage 2 is concept design. This is where you get the visual pictures of what you want to do, and you make an initial brief, and you decide and discuss about construction, maintenance and operation. I mentioned before about health and safety, not only in the design, but the operation of it. Sustainability, is it going to be low energy? It's got to be zero carbon by a certain date, whatever that definition of zero carbon is, and handover. And also what sort of structure you want it to be built out of it. Will it be straw bales, brick and block, timber frame? Those have demands on obviously cost, workload, time, safety. And as you move through stages 2 and 3, you might like to rethink your time scale of how you want to do it. Generally, things take longer than you think they're going to take. And depending on the structure that you're choosing, it may be quicker to get timber frame up, but then it's more expensive, or not the skill set that people have got with brick and block, which can be affected by the weather. So we're going to think about it. Talk about other people you want to involve with the design. Also, if there's any research and develop, if you want to learn it's on a project, particularly innovative housing, you're trying a building method and you want to learn and research, or what low energy and research and monitoring that as you move forward, and trying out new materials that have been developed, and you can feed back that into the design of the next phase. So the architect's expression or concept applied to the brief to achieve the end product. It's not too detailed, it's big picture, it's moving on from the vision, but it's putting some flesh on the bones. You might have a rule of thumb financial plan about it. It won't be detailed because you don't know the costs. Similarly, calculations for how it's going to stand up, outline the project strategies, and if you want it to be an exemplar scheme, and get the research establishment involved and get an accreditation for it, or passive house, which is a ventilation standard, you have to set that out at the first stage. So they're involved, it's harder if they come in later. And the BIM, the information modeling, building information execution plan, if you're going around that way for 3D stuff. So the outputs for this stage, just to go over them again, and this is a bit more detailed, particularly for structural civil engineers. So to think of fire resistance, loading. I mean, fire is very important, as we know from Grenfell. Not that we're going to be building tower blocks as cooperative blocks, I doubt. Foundation strategy. Do you want low impact on piles? What are the ground conditions? Lead designers, who's doing what? Sustainability report. How much concrete are you going to use? Eco concrete, and start to do the structural drawings again. You don't want to do too much because you, in terms of detail and 3D, because you might change it as you go through. And you'll get copies of all these slides, and there's a lot of text to go through and soak in. And I can't stress enough at this stage, as I mentioned before, that you should consult with a local authority, the housing department, building regs, conservation, green infrastructure, as many as you can. And also, ideally, the group should be consulting with the local community group, the wider community, saying what their proposals are. It's fine to have your own ideas, but welcome from the wider community, so you don't get NIMBYs saying, oh, I don't want that. They're green-headed monsters coming in doing this, and it's going to be a prison or whatever. You're not. You're doing something for the community. It's traditional, it's community-led. And then when planning actually goes in, then less likely to object. So I've got a couple of people waiting to come into the room. We've got Liz and Dinewell, I think. Hello.
Hi. Sorry I'm late.
We've just started going through, stage 2 of the concept design. It's an early stage, and I'll go through it again as we move on to the next slide, if it works. So the next stage 3 is spatial coordination, and this is where you work out how they all relate to each other, and also relate to the outside spaces and other buildings. Some of you may have been on a placemaking seminar that we did. It isn't about the buildings, it's the place that they make, the space in between. So that's a wider concept than just the building itself. And the cost information is normally finalized at the end of this stage. But you always refer back to the project brief, your vision, to make sure you're still on track, or do you need to vary that? And in terms of then doing a planning application, which these drawings are building up to do, I don't know how many of you have done a planning application or looked at planning applications. but basically it's a standard form online. You need a location plan at a given scale, either one which is Ordnance Survey 1 to 1,250 or 1 to 2,050. The site and the context. You need a block plan showing it in greater detail and effect and proximity to neighbours and footpaths and highways. You need to have an ownership certificate to prove that you own the land. Do you own any other land next to it? It could be that you own one building and you own a plot of land next to it and you're developing that. So both those would be in on it. I'll just let Casey in.
Dave, can I ask for the ownership certificate? Can that be like if you're entered an agreement with a landowner and you're trying to get planning permission, but you don't yet own it?
Yeah. On the land ownership, you either say that you own it or that you have informed the owner that you make a plan application on their behalf. So if you're buying a parcel of land off somebody and you want to get planning permission before you conclude the negotiations and exchange contracts, you can apply and say, I don't own the land, which is certificate A. It's certificate B, that you don't own the land, but you've notified the owner, who is so and so, that you are applying. So yes, you can apply for land that you don't own with consent of the owner. It wouldn't be a wise thing to do to go and get planning on somebody else's land without them knowing, I don't think. Agricultural holding certificate, if it's rural, you could have rights to it. Not many sites, unless they're rural exception sites, would have a holding certificate. And an application fee, which is determined by the local authority. It could be on the number of units proposed, or it could be on the area of the site. And it can run into a couple of £1,000 for that. If it's in a listed building or conservation area, which a lot of community sites are, you would need what's called a design and access statement. And it explains why it's required, what the design are, what the ecology is, what the impact on transport, and how it meets the local plan and the development plans. If it's a listed building, then there's a listed building with an additional heritage statement. And you would have had close liaison with the conservation architect within the local authority as to what they would be expecting, and CADU and anybody else that was involved. And that does put time and cost on any planning application. So any other queries on that?
Dave, I'm just really trying to get my head around the difference between the concept design stage and the spatial coordination stage. So as far as I remember, in stage 1, you've got your design brief and it's pretty much on paper and you're looking at getting your architect. And then in stage 2, it's the architect's turn to kind of imagine and try and make sure that what he's planning lines up with what the group wants. But then in terms, it's this third stage about the architect then working more closely with the engineering side of things to check what he's planning is realistic. Yeah.
It's basically outline, it might be outline planning if you like. Stage 1 is sort of the concept, the general idea. And then stage 2 is the outline of how that general idea might come to fruition with sort of blocks of groups and massing and whatever. and then you go into more detailed spatial and how they work and fit together into the local environment, and get the details more fixed. Does that explain that?
So would stage 3 include all the landscaping and things, or would that be covered in stage 2?
Landscaping can be part of this stage, or it can be an item to be determined as planning goes ahead.
Right.
It could, you could say, well, we want to determine the final landscape designs with the residents and the communities we go along. These are general landscape provisions. But the details can be worked out. In terms of landscape and the detailed design will affect this, is that you will need what's called sustainable urban drainage system, whereby water should be retained on site to stop flooding. So you may have a swale surface water area or a pond, which could be incorporated into the landscaping. You could do a detailed planning with types of trees marked and sizes, and particularly if you're taking trees down on a site, they may want to see trees to replace, and how are you going to do that, or screening for a certain view. So it's again, it's site by site basis. If you're living off the land and it's a one planet, when you would have some basic indication. One of the sketches I've got at the end will just show how the block layout could show with crops in patches or wherever, not fully detailed yet.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
That's okay. And any questions, everybody, please come in. And I'm just going to let Arvin in now. Afternoon, Arvin. We're at stage 3. And it's where you move into the more detailed structural model to make sure that it stacks up and that you've got the right price for what you're saying. You may have said, oh, it needs a certain size beam, but then you check that and it needs a bigger beam. You confirm the areas where the services run, so that you don't knock holes through a wall and find a pipe there. And the GAs are called general arrangement drawings, so that they're all coordinated. If an M&E mechanical engineer comes in, he knows what structure he's going to be going through. And then you can also think of constructability. Can it be built easily by a self-build group, or are you going to get timber frame built up and they fit it out? Is it going to be traditional brick and block that people can do labour as bricklayers? Is it going to be more traditional, or is it going to be off-site? The timeline of that, the developers will sometimes flex what the construction is according to the availability. There was time when you couldn't get bricks or cement from Europe, so they went to timber frame, and sometimes a shortage of timber, or they can get it more, get brick and blocks more economically. They'll change the structure to suit the costs and the demand for the properties. Health and safety and risk goes through all stages, particularly if you're doing temporary work. In a trench, you've got to shore the trench up. You will have to get road closures to put services in, connect to the road. If you've got a big crane lifting big timber panels in, that would need a road closure, because you don't want neighbours saying, I can't get in and out, and they'd have to divert the traffic round. So you work all that out in detail. So the deliverables from this stage for structural, you maybe get some simple 3D layouts, tolerances, online structural specification, timing, sustainability, including embedded carbon in the things that you're putting in, and the process develop changes if you're flexing it. It's harder to change as you move beyond on this. And sometimes you may want to go beyond what the tolerances are for, you know, a British standard, you know, particularly if you're going for air tightness, and an old British standard for bricks, 24 bricks have to be a certain length, and there's a tolerance of 6 inches with a brick over 24 bricks, because they vary in size because of the firing process. It averages out in you know, numbers. They're normally 9 inches or 215 millimeters. That's their average size, and it does work out. But there's tolerance of things. Whereas if you want it exact for a timber frame going on to something, you haven't got that tolerance. So you set your own tolerances over and above, or you could just have a performance vest to British standard, but it might not be accurate enough for what you want. You know, develop stage, you've got to ensure that it meets legal requirements. How it's going to meet building regs is one thing, having a design, but it's got to be able to stand up as the structural engineer comes in. And decisions affect your budget. So if you choose one thing, you may not be able to afford something else. And if you do design and build with a contractor, they will what they call re-engineer the scheme to do it a slightly different way to get the same output as you want, but maybe a different method. And it could be cheaper or quicker, more energy efficient, but you're not going to be changing it after stage 3. And say at the end of this, you will submit your planning application. So any queries on that bit? So I said I'd share with you at the end a couple of drawings. And this is a drawing from a group in Abergavenny who are looking at potential live work units around here, and looked at a site at Ewes Harrow, just over the border into Herefordshire. And they're also looking in the Forest of Dean. And this is just a computer program that they have. And they want chalets or workshops, huts clustered around a shop and a store, workshops, and just simple indication of parking as you come in, orchard, crops for rotation. You know, that's how much they wanted for the outline side. If you were going into one planet, you may say how many fruit trees and how many beans you're going to get off there, and it would be far more detailed than just something like that. And the computer package could then generate some very simple 3D impressions, whereby you can see the chalets, the trees around the parking, the workshops, and it gives a very easy visual impression that members of the group can understand, and you can talk to planning about what your ideas are, and you can show your neighbours. Well, it's not going to be massive. It's 1.5 stories. It's It's going to be screened by trees. It's going to be clustered around there. People can see and visualize what you're proposing. Another proposal, again, in much more detail, and some people will know this one. This is one in West Wales, which unfortunately has just been refused at planning stage. And you can see they've gone into a great deal of time to show workshop units, and these are live work houses around them, and then there's a big workshop here, car parking there, tree screening, and they have another architect do a perspective showing it, and how you've got the Preseli Mountains in the background, and it's very comprehensive, and it's part of the Build Back Better way of doing things, and it could be an innovative housing program scheme. So, and it went through CABE, which is you have to help me on this one, Commission Built Environment, I think, whereby you get a panel of people to view your application as it goes in for planning, so it ensures that you maintain the architectural heritage and integrity of that particular area. But even having done all that, and although it complies with national planning, local planners didn't like it. So we're looking at a different site closer to the village, and more detail around the cooperative housing area and other things, and Casey and I will be meeting them next week to move that forward. Another scheme which is built is Loftus Village Association in Newport, and I think we had a joint visit with DTA some time ago, Rachel, Seeing is Believing, perhaps before you joined. Anyway, this is an architect's it's an impression. It looks like a photo of, and it's garden village type design with picket fences or picket gates and hedges, and they're obliged to keep it like that. And I've just put up in the top left corner their logo, and it's about green living in urban city. And they spent a lot of time trying to design it, and they eventually ended up with a slightly different one, more simple. And the picture ended up on, this is sort of Harris fencing, and you'll see the shadow behind on the building, and they pinned a banner across it to show people what was going to be built there. And that's their logo, and they're established in 2016. And that was useful for me talking to groups and saying what we were going to be doing, that there's the picture of it, there's their logo, there's Tafek and old there before, and these were some of the residents. And you've got to think, how are you going to communicate what you want to do to the community so that you get support and members of your community-led group, which is why you may be going to need more visual and virtual ways of doing it. And in the bottom right corner is an aerial photo of the site as it was being built out. And people are using drones to do promotional videos. Those who were on Bronclease yesterday, you can do a flyover and you can link into 3D. You start thinking of how you want to communicate what you and your architect have designed to the wider community. So that's the end of my slides. So I will stop sharing, and then we can see where we are. Any queries, or does anybody want me to go back to anything? No. Anything from the beginning you want me to go back to? You all right with that? Everybody's quiet. Is that a good sign? Are we all getting ready for the bank holiday? Arvin, you're on mute, sorry.
Yeah. Can you hear me now? Yeah.
Yeah.
Just the one question: the Pantmeinog site, was that going against the planning policy of building in the countryside? Was it that was the main reason for refusal, or was it not going far enough with the One Planet Wales? So One Planet's development.
There were 5 reasons, and I'm sure Casey will come and help me because she spent a couple of hours listening to the very interesting development committee. Their main objections were that it was outside of the conurbation of Rosebush, right, and they wanted it in the village. Mm-hmm. There was concerns about the housing management of it. How would the cooperative work, and how would allocations be to local people? How would that be sustained?
Yeah.
And Casey, you can probably remember the other couple of ones. Oh, she's going to look for the file.
No, sorry, I'm just shutting the door. No, I think the main one was around sort of the location of the development. So I think it would have potentially gone through if it was a little bit closer to Rosebush.
Yeah.
And yeah, like Dave said, there were some questions, but I don't think they were planning questions or queries in terms of the housing management. That was just sort of discussions beforehand, and also the people developing the houses aren't registered social landlords. So I think there were some queries around sort of affordability as well. But like Dave said, the main issue was around the location. So I think they're planning on sort of rethinking, you know, if they can move it closer to Rosebush, you'll go through.
The group had planning permission for a workshop on the site, which was remote from the village, and they wanted to cluster live-work units around that so that it would sustain the workshop and be a community centre and not impact on the village. And the landowner has many hectares of about 300 hectares, so they're fortunate enough to have another site closer to the village, so they will be able to move it down. But they wanted to establish the principle of, you know, live work remotely in a forest. It doesn't necessarily have to be in a village. You know, it's not going to be noisy live work units with bandsaws whirring away all the time. It's going to be more crafty, I think, making things. But it was the concept of living and working in the forest, which could be replicated elsewhere. You weren't living in one place and then had to drive out to work in the forest. I mean, I know people out in West Wales. You know, they go and live in a car or a caravan when they work in the forest for a week and then come back in. You know, that's the way that they do it, and they can work 18 hours a day in the forest, and because they're living there.
Yeah.
So
I think that concept is a bit alien to the planning authorities, possibly, is it?
It is. But it's a dilemma. It's difficult because nationally they want to encourage, you know, innovative housing program or methods of construction and methods of living, and perhaps we are going to be more remote and more dispersed. And we're not going to be all concentrated in one area because of, I'll use the word endemic, not pandemic. You know, COVID and other things are going to be here forever day. And are we going to be clustering close together? You know, people are moving to Wales because it's more dispersed, and it's about having a sustainable way of doing things that way. They'd be connected by the internet in that location. They wouldn't be traveling to work. People want to live local to where they work. They don't want to be commuting in and out, even if it's a 5-minute drive up to town, up from town to work and back down. You know, that there used to be crofters in the Forest of Dean. You know, people were living and working in the forest. And it's like going back to that. You know, the forestry mission came in. You know, they built houses on the edge, but 50 years ago, there's nobody living and working there. The contractors come in, rip it all out and go away, don't they? So it's about a more sustainable long-term solution. But it's difficult to get past regional and local people. So it will come, and I'm sure they will be successful with a compromise site in the next few months. But you know, that goes back to, you know, it's the concept, the original idea. They're having to vary what their vision was to try and get it through. You know, in spite of, I think there are about 57 different submissions. If you look on the website, ecology, they had to do archaeological. There's a scheduled monument. There's a Iron Age burial. A 1.5 kilometers away, they had to say how it impacted on that. It didn't obscure the view, but as you can see, it was very low impact and screened. It is very, I think it cost about 30 or 40,000 to get to that stage to be able to put a planning application in.
Yeah.
Some of it is lost, but not all of it. You know, it'll take a few more thousand to get it to a resubmission stage, and it's lucky that the landowner has sufficient wherewithal to be able to help with that, and people are putting their time in pro bono, and the centre is able to support with funding from Welsh Government and the Nationwide Foundation. Welsh Government want us to do this. Sophie Howe and Wellbeing want us to do this, but it's about affecting the change.
Yeah.
So, anything else? Nothing on refurb today, Liz, sorry.
No, I haven't managed to connect up with anyone from the council. I think everyone's busy with COVID and stuff, so it's been tricky to contact people that are working on the housing plans. But
Yeah.
but I was just wondering, can I ask you about so you were talking about the One Planet development.
Yeah.
Wasn't there something else within that, but it was sort of on the edge of a village or housing settlement, rather than most of the One Planets are sort of
most of the One Planet developments to date are more isolated.
Yeah,
they are rural, but David Thorpe with the One Planet Council and Development is looking at edge of town development, and he hasn't been successful in it yet, but there's a theoretical model whereby it could work, but it's about identifying a site that can be acquired at the right price, has the right elevation, has the right amount of water, and an area to be able to support all these various businesses. And Welsh Government haven't reviewed, I think it's Town 6 with One Planet development in it since its inception 12 years ago or more, when Lammas was built. And you know, they do need to reflect on it, but as you say, it's having time, and maybe we do need to reflect on how we build things and design things, you know, post pandemic. You know, we spoke last time about under occupied bedrooms. All houses will have a home office, they will have open space. in an ideal world, you know, for exercise, it might be a very different place moving forward.
Because I remember several years ago when I was interested in getting local affordable housing, it seemed like a really good idea that we could look into for the sort of some sort of one planet thing, but the rules were less stringent, weren't they? I mean, I haven't looked at it for years, but I don't think the business plan had to be so sort of rigorous for you'd sort of be living off the land, but not as totally sustainable kind of.
It is quite onerous,
Yeah,
to deliver, but I haven't seen anything in, you know, people's manifesto about, you know, reforming the one planet development
no,
rules and guidelines, but it is something that a community-led scheme could do and maybe lead on. And they are certainly supporting community-led schemes, and maybe how we want to go forward. Do you have any comments, Dainwen? And do you have anything to say about yourself? I mean, welcome.
I have a Welsh name, but a different part of the country, so I'm in Emsworth near Portsmouth.
Oh, that's okay.
Yes, it's okay, apart from the fact land is so expensive here.
Yeah.
That to get any site is nigh on impossible. So we've been going about 3 years. We saved the hospital site from being sold off to probably McCarthy and Stone.
Yeah.
That's been redeveloped into a GP surgery. So that's good, because that's good for the town. We're working with the YMCA to develop an early years youth and community centre at the north of the town. So that's all good, but there's not a house in sight really, which is what we started wanting to do. And I think, as someone said earlier, getting hold of anyone at the council and getting that kind of energy at the moment is really hard. So we think we've identified a plot of land which is held by the council.
Yeah.
So we might be off the starting blocks come the autumn when things have settled down. But
yeah, I mean,
yes,
sure.
all this is very helpful. You know.
Yeah, no, pleased to help, and it's a national thing, and that the total plan, you know, covers the whole of England and Wales, as the planning regulations are the same in England and Wales, the same legislative system. And I'm sure there's a community-led hub that supports Portsmouth. I could have a look.
Yeah, no, there is a Hampshire one.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, it's getting a site.
Yeah, but I think, you know, and you're right with councils, it's the end of the month, the bank holidays coming up. You know, they may be working from home, or they've had children who've been excluded from school because there's a case of COVID in their class bubble. So it's a difficult time, isn't it?
Yeah, local elections.
And out canvassing, can't say anything because of Purda. We might have a view. We've got Senate elections here as well, so we won't be getting any decisions until, you know, mid-May for things. But good. I'm glad you're still with us, and I hope you're finding it useful.
Yeah, no, very much. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Good.
I have to go now, but thank you. I think
I'll stop recording anyway, because I forgot to do that last time. How do I stop recording?